The first thing I heard when I stepped into that glittering mansion was Amanda's voice, sharp and cold as the ice storm outside. "We'd prefer if you left." Her words cut through the elegant Christmas party like broken glass. The chandelier light caught her diamond earrings, her designer dress shimmered, and her eyes swept over me like I was something that had been tracked in from the street. My shoes were wet, my hands still stained from the roadside, my simple burgundy dress wrinkled from hours of effort that now felt wasted. I'd been late, 30 minutes late, and I'd expected understanding. Instead, I was standing in front of my son's in-laws being silently measured and quietly dismissed. If only they knew what had happened on my way there. 3 months earlier, my life had been small and quiet. I was 64, living in a modest apartment that I kept just warm enough to take the chill out of Connecticut winters. My husband Frank had died 5 years ago, leaving me with enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. My days passed with routine groceries on Tuesdays, church on Sundays, occasional dinners with neighbors who, like me, were on fixed incomes. Then my son David called. "Mom, Amanda's family wants to meet you. Really meet you this time." I could hear that careful tone he used when he was trying to keep the peace. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, had been married to David for 3 years and had barely acknowledged my existence beyond polite obligation. The Whitmans were practically Connecticut royalty, old money, old traditions, and old attitudes about people like me. They lived in a world of estates, charity galas, and perfectly polished appearances. Every family event I'd attended before had been uncomfortable with me seated at the far end of a long table, listening to conversations about things I couldn't relate to: business deals, European vacations, country club gossip. Still, this invitation felt like a chance. Maybe Amanda was finally ready to accept me. Maybe her grandmother Eleanor had encouraged more inclusion. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, though something in David's voice made me cautious. He hesitated. "Mom, just maybe dress nicely. You know how they are about appearances." Oh, I knew. Amanda had never been cruel, but she didn't need to be. Her disapproving glances said enough. Still, I decided to see this as an opportunity. Maybe if I showed them I could fit into their world, I'd finally be welcomed into my son's life in the way I had always wanted. I prepared for that Christmas party like it was the most important event of my life, because it was. I spent 2 days hunting for a dress I could afford that didn't look cheap. I found one at a discount store, a deep burgundy, with subtle beading that looked far more expensive than the $65 I paid for it. I bought matching shoes that pinched my feet and a small clutch. I even scheduled a hair appointment and practiced polite conversation in front of my bathroom mirror. But the morning of the party, the weather had other plans. Ice pelted the windows when I woke, and my phone blared a weather alert about dangerous road conditions. My salon canceled my hair appointment when they lost power. The alteration shop was delayed because of flooding. By noon, I was still in my bathrobe, wondering if the party would even happen. But David called at 12:30 p.m. "Mom, are you still planning to come?" "The roads are pretty bad," he said, and I could hear Amanda in the background telling him to remind me everyone else had already arrived. Everyone except me. "I'll be there," I told him. I wouldn't miss it. I did my hair and makeup myself, though my hands shook slightly as I applied lipstick. When I slipped into the dress, I caught my reflection and thought, yes, maybe I could belong tonight. I left my apartment at 1:30 p.m., driving carefully through slick roads. The closer I got to Greenwich, the more elegant the homes became, and the more nervous I felt. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman stood on the side of the icy road, her silver hair wet with freezing rain beside a luxury sedan with its hood up. I could have driven past. The smart thing would have been to call for help and keep going. I was already late, but I couldn't leave her there. I pulled over and got out the freezing rain soaking through my coat immediately. She looked at me with sharp blue eyes, eyes that were assessing, not pleading. "My car won't start," she said evenly. "Let me take a look," I said, though I knew my appearance was already ruined. Frank had taught me enough about cars to diagnose corroded battery terminals. "Do you have any cola?" I asked. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but produced a small bottle from an expensive handbag. As I poured the cola over the battery and scraped at the corrosion with my car key, I thought about Amanda's world, about how appearances meant everything, and how I was sacrificing mine for a stranger. When the car started, the woman smiled for the first time. "You're very kind." Not many people would have stopped, especially dressed for a formal party. I laughed softly. Well, I can't exactly show up looking like this now. Her expression shifted, almost approving. Anyone worth knowing will understand what you did. And if they don't, they're not worth knowing. She handed me a card. Eleanor Whitman, it read. My heart stopped. I had just helped Amanda's grandmother. 3 months earlier, I had been living quietly in my small apartment, stretching my modest pension as far as it would go. Since Frank died 5 years ago, my life had been simple, predictable, and just barely enough. When my son David called with news that should have filled me with joy, I felt an undercurrent of unease instead. Mom, Amanda's family wants to meet you. Really meet you this time, he said, his voice carrying that careful tone he used when he didn't want to upset me. They're hosting their annual Christmas party and asked me to invite you. It should have been a moment of celebration. For 3 years, Amanda had kept me at arm's length, treating me as though I were an embarrassing detail in David's life rather than his mother. The Whitmans were old money Connecticut society, polished to perfection, and every interaction with them reminded me that I was a woman who bought her clothes on sale and cut her own hair to save money. Still, this invitation felt like my chance to finally be part of David's new world, to prove I wasn't the burden they thought I was. I told David I would be there and spent the next week preparing like it was the most important event of my life. In many ways, it was. I spent 2 whole days shopping, searching for a dress that looked expensive but didn't exceed my budget. A patient saleswoman at a discount department store helped me find a burgundy dress with just enough beading to look elegant, marked down from $200 to $65. I bought matching shoes that pinched my feet and a tiny purse that looked refined. I even booked a hair appointment for the morning of the party. David called twice during the week to gently remind me to keep conversation light, to avoid anything that might be controversial. Amanda's stressed about this party, Mom, he said. Her whole family and her father's business associates will be there. She just wants everything to go perfectly. I understood the unspoken message. Don't embarrass us. So I practiced polite conversation in front of the mirror, rehearsed how to answer questions about my small apartment without sounding pitiful, and promised myself I would be flawless. On the morning of the party, I woke early to the sound of ice tapping against my window. A winter storm had rolled in overnight, turning Connecticut into a frozen wonderland that was more treacherous than beautiful. My hair appointment was canceled when the salon lost power, and my dress pickup was delayed when the alteration shop's street flooded. By noon, I was sitting in my bathrobe watching the freezing rain coat the world in glassy danger, wondering if the party would even happen. David called at 12:30 p.m. to check if I was still coming. I could hear Amanda in the background telling him the party was still on, that everyone was already there. Everyone except me. I looked at the dress hanging on the back of my door at the makeup I'd laid out carefully the night before and decided I wasn't going to let the storm stop me. Without professional help, I styled my own hair and applied my makeup, doing my best to copy the polished look Amanda always wore. I slipped into the burgundy dress, added the shoes, and for one brief moment, I felt ready. The woman in the mirror looked like she belonged at a party full of Connecticut's elite, at least until I pulled on my practical winter coat, the only one I owned. I left my apartment at 1:30 p.m., driving slowly along the slick roads. Traffic crawled and my carefully planned schedule dissolved as the minutes ticked past. I was already 30 minutes late when I turned onto the winding road that led to the Whitman estate. That's when I saw her, an older woman, standing beside a luxury sedan with its hood up her silver hair collecting ice. She wore a beautiful coat but no hat or gloves. I could have driven past. I should have driven past. Stopping meant losing any chance of arriving at the party looking presentable. But I couldn't leave her there. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Do you need help?" I called. She turned and I got my first good look at her, elegant, even in distress, with sharp blue eyes that watched me with calm curiosity. "My car just died," she said matter-of-factly. I got out the freezing rain, soaking through my coat and flattening my hair as I peered under her hood. I wasn't a mechanic, but Frank had taught me enough to spot the problem. "Battery terminals are corroded," I said. "Do you have any cola?" She looked at me like I was crazy, but she searched her car and returned with a small bottle of Coke. As I poured it over the terminals, I was acutely aware of how ridiculous we must look, 2 women in formal clothes performing roadside repairs in an ice storm. "You're going to ruin your dress," she observed. "Already," I said, using my car key to scrape away the corrosion. Sometimes you just have to help people and worry about appearances later. When the engine finally turned over, she gave me a smile that was warm and approving. "You're very kind," she said. "Most people wouldn't have stopped, especially dressed for a formal party." I looked down at myself, soaked and stained. "Well, I can't exactly show up to this party looking like this," I said. "Maybe I should just head home." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "Anyone worth knowing will understand that you put kindness before vanity." She handed me an embossed business card. My breath caught when I read the name Eleanor Whitman. "You're Amanda's grandmother," I whispered. "I am," she said with a knowing smile. "And you must be Margaret Sullivan. I've been very curious to meet the woman who raised such a good man." I stared at her speechless for a moment. Of all the ways I'd imagined meeting Eleanor Whitman, this was not it. Soaked through my hair, ruined my dress, stained with cola. She seemed to read my thoughts because she chuckled softly. "Oh, don't look so stricken. You've made quite an impression already, and a better one than if you'd simply walked in on time with perfect hair." My instinct was to argue, to insist that arriving polished mattered, but the sincerity in her eyes stopped me. "I don't think Amanda would agree with you," I said carefully. Eleanor's smile thinned. "Amanda has very specific ideas about what is and isn't appropriate. But she's young. She'll learn." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and watched as she climbed back into her car. Before she shut the door, she said, "You should still come to the party. Not for Amanda, for David. He'll be worried sick if you don't." And just like that, she drove off toward the estate, leaving me standing in the freezing rain, holding her card like it was something sacred. By the time I reached the house, my hair had dried into frizz, and the hem of my dress was stiff with ice. I paused on the front steps, hearing the muted sound of laughter and music inside, and nearly turned back. The butler's eyebrows lifted slightly when he opened the door, but he ushered me inside without a word. The warmth hit me first, then the scent of pine and cinnamon, then the sight of a room so beautifully decorated it might have been lifted from a magazine. And then came Amanda. She crossed the room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Margaret," she said, her tone clipped. "You made it." "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry I'm late. There was a—" But before I could finish explaining about Eleanor, Amanda glanced at my coat, my shoes, my damp hair, and I saw at the flash of disapproval she didn't bother to hide. "Well, you're here now," she said briskly. "David's by the fire. I'm sure he'll be relieved." I found my son surrounded by Amanda's cousins and their partners, looking handsome and happy. Relief lit his face when he saw me. "Mom." He crossed the room and hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "I'm glad you came." That moment almost made everything worth it, almost. Dinner was elegant and delicious, though I could feel Amanda's eyes on me whenever I spoke. I was careful, painfully careful, choosing my words like stepping stones across a raging river. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, laughed at jokes I didn't understand, and kept my hands folded in my lap so no one would see them shake. It wasn't until dessert was served that Eleanor entered the dining room. The conversations quieted as she made her way to the table. She looked regal, refreshed, and not at all like someone whose car had been dead on the side of the road an hour earlier. When her gaze found mine, she smiled a slow, deliberate smile and raised her glass slightly. Amanda saw it. I could feel her stiffen beside David, her grip on his arm tightening. Mother Amanda said sweetly, "I didn't know you'd met David's mom before tonight." "Oh, yes," Eleanor said pleasantly, seating herself at the head of the table. Margaret stopped to help me on the road. Most impressive woman, she had my car running before the tow truck even arrived. A murmur ran around the table. Someone said, "In this weather." "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "She didn't just show up tonight, she showed character. Something we could all use a little more of." The room went quiet just for a moment, and then conversation resumed. But Amanda's face remained frozen in that polite, social smile that was somehow sharper than any glare. I realized then that no matter what I did, how carefully I dressed, how perfectly I behaved, Amanda might never truly accept me. But I also realized something else. It didn't matter. Eleanor Whitman had seen me, truly seen me, and she had approved. And for the first time that night, I felt my spine straighten and my shoulders relax. I belonged here, maybe not in Amanda's world, but in David's, and that was enough.